Okay, excellent. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. It's my great pleasure to be with you again, to all our viewers and friends from around the world. This evening, we're going to discuss Ireland's relationship with Palestinism. And to that end, I have my old friend Eugene Doyle, a famous radio presenter in Ireland, who has a very interesting background. Eugene and I go back a long way. In fact, we were school friends back in 1973 in Dublin, Ireland. And he has a rather interesting story, and we're going to discuss Eugene's experiences and an epiphany that came about, a change of heart and a change of opinion that came in the light of certain experiences. Okay, so without further ado, I'm going to ask Eugene to tell us a little bit about himself, and then we're going to have a little bit of a conversation and probe the topic of Ireland's romance with Palestinism, and we're going to take it from there. Thank you. Eugene, would you like to tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, buenos tardes, tutti. Good evening, everybody. As Marco says, Eugene Doyle is my name, and Marco and myself go back a long way. We're 55 years, in more or less, we've known each other, and always been a good friend of Marco's for over those years. Now, I suppose my first encounter with anything to do with Palestine was in the spring of the autumn of 1984.
So, Eugene, let me interrupt you. I neglected to mention, of course, that you served in Lebanon in the Irish Defence Forces with the so-called peacekeeping forces. Okay, yes. So I apologize. Okay,
no,
please.
So I served 21 years in the Irish Defence Forces, and I was dispatched to Lebanon in 1984 under UNIFIL, and in October 1984. And I think it was around the time that the Israelis were withdrawing from the first war in Lebanon. The withdrawal was nearly complete at that stage when it was happening. Now, I was 20 at the time, and I suppose I was, I had been in a place called Hadatta in southern Lebanon. That's where the headquarters was of my company. And we got to know a lot of Lebanese ordinary people there, as well as in other places. I served as well in Tyre, which a lot of my colleagues didn't serve in, but I served in Tyre, or Tyre, as maybe some people would call it. I served in a Lebanese barracks there, where the Lebanese army were being trained to take over the border on the Lebanese side when the Israelis had finally withdrawn. And I suppose at that young age, I had I was I was fed the line, I suppose, that the Israelis were the baddies and the Palestinians were the poor downtrodden people, and I would have seen that, I suppose, as the narrative would have been my way of seeing things at the time. And I suppose it wasn't helped by when I'd stop an Israeli jeep at a checkpoint in Lebanon and ask them where they're going, and they say to me, "I'm going. Where are you coming from? I'm coming from Israel. Where are you going? I'm going to Israel." It was that kind of smart ass stuff. Which a lot of soldiers go on. So
that resonates, Eugene. That resonates.
That resonates.
I must admit. So
yeah.
I wouldn't have been surprised by that at all. Now,
yeah.
So let's move ahead now about 30 odd years, because we reconnected after a long time. And you had a certain impression which had solidified during the course of the years, but at a certain point you had an epiphany. You were exposed to different facts, and I suppose you began to ask some questions. Would you like to tell us a little bit about that?
Yes, I suppose I suppose one thing that has really governed my my change in attitude was when I saw members of the far left in the Oireachtas, which is the parliament in Dublin, when I saw people of the extreme left kind of constantly berating Israel and and all one-sided. I kind of said to myself at that stage, okay, there must be something. This can't be the whole story. There has to be something else here, because they can't. Why is there no blame on the other side whatsoever? And it's all down to Israel. And I suppose, Marco, I haven't reconnected with you and listened to your story out living in Jerusalem and what you faced and the people faced, even in normal times, normal in it with inverted commas, normal times, came under attacks, sustained attacks from various places. And I suppose I looked at those. I did a reanalysis of how I looked at the whole situation in Israel and in the occupied territories. And what I did was I did a lot of reading. I started to read a lot and read from both sides, from people on the left and people in the center and people on the right. Some recommendations of books came from yourself from both sides of those,
right.
as well as from some of my friends, Jewish friends here in Dublin. I would have read a lot, and it certainly changed my view entirely of the situation that Israel finds itself in.
Indeed, indeed. In fact, I invited you to look at both sides of the story. In fact, that was my approach from the beginning. I didn't want to impose my view upon you. And I think this is an approach that we should be using. We should be getting people to ask questions, because my sensation is that people have been brainwashed. They've only heard one side of the story. And every time they hear about Israel, there's a Pavlovian response, not a thoughtful response. It's just purely instinctive, if you will, and they obviously take the side of Palestinism, put it that way. But when people reason, and you're a case in point here, when people are exposed to facts and they ask themselves questions, they can come to some different conclusions. Okay. Now, what I'd like to do is to extend the conversation a little bit. I'd like to talk about the situation in Ireland on a political level and also on the level of public perceptions among the wider public. What can you tell me about that?
Okay, I suppose the first thing to say is that Ireland, its official position towards Israel is that it recognizes the state of Israel. However, in my opinion, that's where it starts and ends. That's my opinion. Because everything that the government representatives do, or the media, and I'll talk about them, and we'll get to the media shortly, but they never question the other side whatsoever. I mean, only just in the last couple of days, no, I'll talk about the media in a minute, but in relation to what's going on in Palestine, there is, we all know that Ireland has recognized Palestine along with Norway and Spain.
Indeed.
And I'm wondering what they've actually recognized, because it is very clear from the PA, from Hamas, that it is from the river to the sea.
Yes, indeed.
That they want. So I'm actually wondering what Ireland has actually recognised, because it's not clear to me what they've recognised, and whether it's naivety or whether it is whether it's anti-Semitism or whatever it is, there has to be a reason behind it, because there is never questioned on the other side. For example, Lebanon has a sovereign government, of which Hezbollah is a member of. Not once have I heard Ireland or anyone else call out Lebanon in relation to the attacks by Hezbollah on the north of the north in northern Israel, where they've displaced so many people from Israelis from their homes, and there's no call for them to end it. And everything is about appeasing and looking for a diplomatic solution, which is not, in my opinion, is not going to come. A diplomatic solution is not going to come. But there's never any call. It's all about, and in the morning, I feel if Israel went in and attacked Lebanon, who would be the baddies? Israel would be the baddies, despite the world knowing and Ireland knowing that what's been going on since October 8th from North. So I think the Irish position has developed over. I suppose, Marco, it's come from this myth, in my opinion, that they've always tried to equate the Irish situation of colonialism of 800 years under British rule, colonialism, with that of the Israelis colonizing the Palestinians or the Arabs in that area.
Indeed. And let me interrupt you, because I think that is very much a disanalogy, because if there were to be made an analogy, it would be between the Irish struggle for freedom and the Jewish struggle for freedom in the land of Israel. I think there is greater affinity. And I believe President de Valera recognized that in his exchanges with Lord Mayor Briscoe many years ago. There was an awareness of that. So I ask myself, what has changed in the intervening time? Why has Ireland bought into Palestinism hook, line, and sinker? Who are the actors who these Pied Pipers of Palestinism within Irish society? Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Okay, so strangely enough, up to 1967, there would have been a lot of sympathy for the Jewish people about them being surrounded by hostile environments up to 1967. Something dramatically changed after 1967, a war which, again, Israel did not start, but to the surprise of many, finished in a very short time. And attitudes changed. Now, I always go back to Ireland's attitude towards the Jewish people. I always go back to the government sending its sympathies on the death of Hitler, passing its sympathies onto the death of Hitler, which I think should never have been done. But anyway, it is what it is done. I think before I say what has led to this, I think first of all, I think all those people, most of those, not saying all, most of those people that are protesting on the streets of Dublin and Palestinian flags and that, none of them, in my opinion, not I won't say none of them, but the vast majority of them have not a clue about the situation.
Indeed.
Indeed. What they're doing is they're equating it, as I said, to colonization by the British of the Irish for so many years.
Right.
And if people looked at the facts at all, for example, in 1948, it wasn't the Jews or the Israelis who wanted to colonize anything. They wanted a state. They were given a state by the UN. They were attacked the day after, if you like, for the want of a better word. They were attacked the day after.
Yeah.
And they were attacked the day after, and it was the PLO, their representative, who encouraged their people to get out.
Indeed.
Of Israel at the time.
Yes, it was
and
the
told
Arab.
them they'd be back within a matter of weeks.
Indeed, it was the Arab leadership which encouraged and indeed initiated the war. Indeed,
yes.
Indeed.
Now,
go ahead.
What you have then is you have elements on the severe left in this country who have continued to ingrain this narrative within the Irish audience. Now, one thing you'll probably ask me is, does it come top down or bottom up? My guess is it's top down. I think the vast majority of Irish people are not exactly on the same page as the government is. Indeed. In relation to this. Indeed. I think that there is a lot of people out there, right-minded people out there, who believe that there is two sides to this story, and that we're being fed one side.
So the chattering classes, very much as elsewhere, are defining the agenda and the narrative.
Yes.
Now, in Europe, there have been some changes. Certainly in Italy, for example, the center-right would tend to be more pro-Israel. I'm not saying it's Zionist, but it's certainly more pro-Israel than it was 20, 30 years ago. I don't see a similar phenomenon in Ireland. It seems to be blanket wall-to-wall anti-Israel. Am I correct in saying that?
I think you could only say that you're correct in that, because there is no. In actual fact, I would say at the moment that Ireland is probably one of the most anti-Semitic countries in Europe at the moment. Now, when I say Ireland is, I don't necessarily mean the people.
The people, of course.
I mean the leaders and the leadership and the people who.
Indeed, indeed. Let me just stop you there, because in a sense, let me just interrupt you for 1 second, because I think I have to specify. Ireland, in its long history, has been one of the few countries where there were very few exceptions of anti-Semitism. And indeed, the Jews were accepted and they were integrated into the fabric of Irish society. And I can certainly remember my relations with people were very good, probably better than in many other countries. So the Jewish community was well integrated into Ireland. Relations were very friendly. There was certainly very good chemistry, and I'd like to believe that's still the case. My fear is, with all this propaganda, things could change. Eugene, what are your feelings about that?
Well, I do, and it has to bring me to the media in Ireland, Marco, because our public broadcaster, for example, RTE, I just took a couple of screenshots. Just over the last couple of days, not even over the last couple of weeks, just over the last couple of days of headlines in Ireland. These are literally, and so I took three. Just Israeli strikes, headline: Israeli strikes kill at least 11 as tanks push into Rafah.
Right.
That's the one.
Yes,
Israeli strikes kill at least 42. Gaza government office says.
Yes.
Israel pounds Gaza, killing dozens as fighting rages.
Right.
So what you have here is you have 95% or 97% of the media in Ireland are on the same page in relation to Israel.
Right. And it's a very distorted picture. From what you have just said, it would seem just as if the Wehrmacht had rolled in.
Yeah, absolutely.
Unprovoked. Yeah.
Because even the UN has altered the figures of the amount of people that have been killed, and every innocent death in Gaza, in Israel, is a tragedy, absolute tragedy. But the likes of RTE, our national broadcaster, have been accepting the numbers from Hamas ministry, health ministry, or whatever, have been accepting the numbers that have been killed. Even the UN has revised those figures downwards.
Indeed.
But RTE and the media here have not reported that.
Right. Now, staying on the topic of the media, I'd like to draw upon your very interesting experiences as a presenter. You have had some guests on both sides of the political divide, let us say. Would you like to tell us a little bit about that?
Okay, so one thing I've tried to do in my program, I do a current affairs program on a Friday on Community Radio Kilkenny City, and one of the things I've tried to do is I've tried to at least try and give, in as far as I can, the Israeli side to these things, as well as listening to the other side as well and getting the views of the other side. And I had an interesting interview in recent months with Itamar Marcus.
Indeed.
Now, for those who don't know who Itamar Marcus is, well, he's the director and founder of Palestinian Media Watch, which is an organization that monitors what is being taught in schools, in
broadcast in the media,
in broadcast in the media, but in the PA and in Gaza, in the territories that the PA are over at the moment, and indeed in Gaza. and monitors what's being taught and in those textbooks and in the media. And it is by and large, it is a message of hatred towards students.
Yes,
now,
I'm familiar with that. Yes.
So I brought on Itamar because I'd met Itamar on conversations with yourself and others, and I brought him on to ask him about what he found when he looked at at what was being taught in schools. He was able to tell me, and I covered a half an hour interview with him. And you know, in my opinion, there isn't two sides to when you're spewing hate and publishing hate on any side, publishing hate in textbooks and in things for children, and you know, kind of teaching them how to use what to do with a Jew when you see a Jew, and teaching young people that. There's no two sides to that, in my opinion. However, having broadcast the thing, I got messages in asking me, saying to me that it was unbalanced.
Indeed.
Unbalanced, even though the interview was about what the Palestinian media wanted.
Indeed.
So my producer said to me, look, you're going to have to give another side to this. And I said, okay, if they want another side, I will give them another side. Now, I contacted a former MEP. She lost her seat in the recent European elections in Ireland, MEP Claire Daly.
Yes.
Now,
yes.
Claire Daly, I interviewed her. I gave her the same amount of time, if even a little bit more time, on the program, and I put the questions about Israel and about Palestine, and she certainly gave it with both barrels.
Yes.
You know, her anti-Israel, you know, and pro-Palestinian.
Yes,
so,
yes. I excuse me, Eugene. I heard that conversation, and it was more bile and spleen than cogent conversation. I must admit, it was listening to somebody who, who was essentially unhinged. She couldn't present a cogent argument, and when you challenged her, she'd just go off in all directions.
For sure, yeah. And but I had a mission there, was to bring people the other side,
of course.
and to show that this is what the other side of what Ireland is thinking. And just in relation to the recent European elections in Ireland, we had three characters in Europe. We've one still in one of those characters is still in Europe. We had Mick Wallace from Wexford. It was an MEP. You had Claire Daly, and you had Luke Ming Flanagan.
Right.
Now, Claire Daly and Mick Wallace lost their seats in the current European elections, and Luke Ming Flanagan won back his seat. Now, he's after being elected 3 or 4 times. I think it could be three times.
Yeah.
Been elected, and on his victory in the count hall, he draped himself in a Palestinian flag.
Indeed. Extraordinary. Extraordinary. It seems as if Palestinism has become integral to some people's identity.
Yes, absolutely, 100%. It has. If you are not pro-Palestinian, then there is certainly you are at risk of losing your identity.
Right.
If you're not, that would be my opinion of it.
Right.
Of it, that you're at risk of losing it. Now, this is another interesting. This wasn't an interview now, but I recently spoke with a former general in the Defence Forces.
Indeed.
Long time retired. And I was just talking to him about October 7th. And I said to him, I kind of got the impression that obviously he was on the Palestinian side. And I said, but surely, I said, after October 7th, I said, surely the Israelis had the right to go into Gaza. And his answer to me was, his first answer to me was, the Israelis always look for it.
Mm. Right.
They look for it. They're like a
They,
magnet for it.
indeed. In other words, they have it coming.
Yes.
This is
And
the
then,
implicit. Okay, go ahead. Sorry.
and then I said to him, you know, I said, they've gone in to protect. It's an existential war that they're in here. And he turned around to me and he said to me, "This is the words he said to me. It's the Jew, Eugene.
Mm.
They always have to close the deal.
Mm.
It's the Jew." And I said,
Extraordinary.
I said, but I said, haven't the Jewish, Israel especially, um, haven't they founded so many things to improve humanity? They've been at the core thing, and he didn't want to go any further with that.
He disconnected.
But,
he disconnected at that point. There was no desire to hold a civilized conversation, in other words.
But the mask was down.
Exactly.
The mask was let down, and I believe that is the attitude of. I'm not saying the Irish people. It's not. It's the attitude of the elite.
Right.
Is the attitude of the elite, and it's hidden. It's hidden because Ireland always say that they're not anti-Semitic, but they can disagree with Israel. Of course, they can disagree with Israel.
Yeah.
But I think sometimes that it's used. Disagreeing with Israel is used to cloak anti-Semitism.
Indeed. Now, what about demonstrations in Ireland? Because we've seen mass demonstrations all throughout Europe, the United Kingdom, France, the United States, and they've become rather violent. Has there been anything like that in Ireland?
Okay, we had one in early May in Trinity College in Dublin, and it went on for a number of days, and they ended up getting their way. That they, after a 5-day protest, the university agreed to divest from Israeli companies operating in the occupied Palestinian territories. So they got their victory. But when those protests were going on in UCLA and all of those places in the States, there wasn't at that time there wasn't a budget of anyone, and it's like you said earlier, it's like that it's an identity thing to be pro-Palestine or to carry Palestine flag, and I think it's kind of Trinity was kind of more or less said to itself, we nearly better get in on the action here because
they jumped on the bandwagon.
We're too quiet. The only in most of the universities we haven't seen it only there. The only other incident that we've had is in University College in Cork, where students and staff have urged the university to call for an Israeli company to be removed from an EU-funded research project that its own Tyndall Institute is also a partner of. So they've looked for an Israeli company to be removed from it. Now that hasn't happened yet, but I'm just saying that
it's in the works.
It's in the works. It's in the works. But other than that, the universities in Ireland have not had protests or marches. You have seen them on the streets, all right. There's protests on the streets, and a couple of thousand people definitely turn up for those marches against Israel and pro-Palestine. Yeah.
Right. Now we see throughout Europe that there is a reaction because in the light of immigration from certain countries with certain habits, with certain mores that clash with those with which we identify in the West, something has begun to change. Indeed, in some cases, the penny has dropped. They see that there is a real threat. Do we see anything akin to that in Ireland?
I suppose, look, immigration is an issue in Ireland at the moment. It is the government are trying to manage the narrative on it. There is an issue, there's no doubt about it. I suppose it's not Ireland isn't at the point yet where you see what the likes of what's going on in the UK, for example, with sustained years of immigrants coming in from countries, Islamic countries coming in now, and obviously taking part in those protests and in those marches against Israel, and that hasn't fully surfaced here yet.
But excuse me, let me just stop you there, Eugene, for 1 second, because we did have a very serious event a few months ago where an Algerian immigrant who'd been given citizenship went on the rampage.
Oh, yes.
And we saw
Yeah, absolutely. There is isolated incidents. There's no doubt about that. They are isolated incidents. They're not. You couldn't say that they're the norm. They are isolated incidents. And yes, you're right about the Algerian and that went on the rampage. But they are isolated incidents at this point. But whether we have never, in my opinion, we've never learned from the UK's attitude towards all of this. We haven't learned from it. Are we going to learn from it now? I don't know. I would have to be skeptical that we are going to learn from it. Because there is a huge divide between the East and West. Middle East and West. There's no doubt. It's huge. Now,
Eugene, sorry, I'm sorry. I see we have a few questions coming in, and I'd like to address those in fairness to our viewers. Okay, so here's one question. I'll start with the first one. What do you think is the fate of Europe in the coming years? Will we be overwhelmed by Islamic and political anti-Semitism? Would you like to address that from an Irish perspective?
I think there's a lot of opposition to the EU immigration pact that's going through at the moment. There's a lot of opposition to that in Ireland at the moment. It will go through, but and we will, I suppose, be compelled to take a lot of migrants, whether it be economic or otherwise. So I suppose. When you look at France and you look at the UK, the foothold that the extremists and not ordinary Muslim people or ordinary Islamic people, they are not to blame in this. It's the extremists and the elites who control this are rising in Europe, and that's kind of scary.
It is indeed, but isn't there a case to be made that the silent majority doesn't seem to be able to muster the necessary moral strength to disengage from the extremists? Isn't there a case to be made for that as well? Surely, if you see these people are deviants, you should distance yourself from them, and that's the problem I think we see throughout Europe, where I'm sure there's a consistent element of Muslims who really want to have a decent life and to educate their children and to pursue happiness and so on and so forth. But we don't see a critical mass pushing back against the lunatic. Let's hope it's a lunatic fringe.
Yes, there is a point to what you're saying. There's no doubt about that. There's also, you see, what you have is if you look across the Parliament in Ireland, the Parliament in Ireland, there is people who don't agree. There's people who disagree with Ireland recognizing Palestine. There's people, but it's got to the stage now that it's so ingrained in thing, and the minority has become the bigger voice, and that people are afraid to say how they really feel. They feel it, but they can't say it. And that to me is definitely is an affront to democracy. When we think, but there doesn't seem to be there's political correctness when it comes to pushback on extremists. There seems to be a kind of political correctness that
stifles the debate.
Yes.
Eugene, I've got another question here. Let's have a look at that. Given your view that the mask has slipped and what a senior Irish officer said to you privately, do you believe the Army General Staff are capable of giving unbiased, accurate briefing to our government?
Well, let me start with Lebanon. One of the things, when I look back at having been in Lebanon, is Ireland. When I served in Lebanon, and it's no different than they're serving there now, were among the Lebanese people. It wasn't a case of they were stuck in a zone between Israel and the Lebanese people. They were among the Lebanese people. So I have, in my opinion, I have to question whether they can be neutral on this issue.
Okay.
I have to question that, and I wouldn't have questioned it when I was in it. But now that I look back,
yes,
and I look at the thing, I can question it.
Yeah.
Now, would I say that I couldn't honestly say that the general staff are not giving the government reasonable advice. I couldn't say that. That's
right.
It'd be unfair for me to say that.
It would be stretching it a bit.
Yes.
Okay, let's look at the next question we have. Does lack of leadership in government and the absence of leadership in our established Christian churches assist the rise of this hate and create a vacuum for those seeking answers?
In relation to leadership, this is a problem that and I'm sure I'm not the only one who sees this right around the world, is that there's a lack of leadership right around the world. Is our leaders are a lot different than our predecessors,
indeed,
who showed leadership. It's a lot of it is sound bites now. The media are in control of a lot of things. I don't believe that there is true leadership. There's certainly not in Ireland. I don't believe there's true leadership in Ireland.
There's a lack of.
There's lack of it and that includes that would follow in the Christian churches as well. I believe I've met loads of many priests who would be sympathetic to the Jewish people. And as you know, some of yourself.
Yes, indeed.
I've also met priests and bishops who are not, who would say in one breath that they are, but they don't. They don't follow through.
Indeed,
don't follow through.
Interesting. I'd like to sort of examine perhaps one part of the political spectrum which, while not in agreement with their views, they perhaps do have leadership. That is Sinn Féin, a well-organized, well-drilled party that has basically tied its fate to a great extent to Palestinism. What could you tell us about that?
Well, I suppose, in my opinion, I would have thought maybe a year or two ago that the leadership of Sinn Féin was unstoppable. That it was a military machine, and no pun intended. That they got things done, and they had everything, every base covered. And now I'm looking at various polls that have been taken. I'm looking at the local elections that have just taken place here. Local elections, that means to councils and boroughs that have taken place in Ireland on the same day as the European elections. And Sinn Féin went for the stars. They went all out to get and they came up very, very badly. They gained some seats, but they came up badly. And I think that the steam has run out of. Now, don't forget, you see, Sinn Féin is not. It's not too many generations away from the IRA. All those people who are in Sinn Féin now are peace people. I I don't say that, but they're not that far away
Yes,
from
indeed. Yeah.
from when we had trouble in
Right.
So,
Indeed, but we have to bear in mind that the relationship with the PLO and the training camps
that's where I
are
was
a
coming
pretty rich part of their
Yes,
history.
that's where I was coming to.
Okay, sorry, I
Yeah,
interrupted you.
no, you're right.
Yeah.
You're absolutely. That's where I was coming to. You know, their relationship with Libya, their relationship with the PLO, you know, it has formed their you know, formed their sympathy,
identity, and their identity to a great extent,
and their sympathy to Palestinians, and misplaced, in my opinion, misplaced sympathy in a lot of cases.
Certainly. We have another question here. For this position on Palestine, this notion of a Palestinian state, which has no basis in history, as we've discussed before, we cannot speak of the ethnogenesis of a Palestinian people. We're talking about it's essentially fictitious. Now, do you think that Ireland's let's say, will to delve into this, to buy into this, is due also to economic interest with the Arab nations?
Oh, for sure. There's geopolitical interests involved in all of this. There's absolutely no doubt about that. You know, and but it just seems it seems to me like there's huge trade done between Israel and Ireland at the moment. There's huge trade done between both countries. So while there is a certain amount of economic interests in the Arab world, there's no doubt about that. I'm not quite so sure that is what's driving everything.
Right.
I'm not quite so sure about that. I mean, I would have to monitor that a little bit more, but I don't think that's quite. You know, I mean, I'm looking at what's going on in Gaza, and I'm looking at what's going on the north of your border in Israel, and I'm saying to myself, how could any leader in the country expect the leadership of Netanyahu or whoever is in charge? How can they expect them to agree to a Palestinian state when you have terrorists being paid monthly stipends for
a pay-to-slave policy? A pay-to-slave policy, yes.
You have, as Palestinian Media Watch have shown, that they have really ingrained in young people's head the hatred of Jews. And, you know, I've often floated in my own head of maybe what should happen. What should happen there is maybe if it was something like Puerto Rico, where it wasn't a state, but it was governed by the Palestinians themselves, and not necessarily the PA, but Palestinian civilians, but that it came under another country for the next 20 years to allow that hatred to
dissipate,
and allow maybe at some point in the future a state to form. You certainly, I couldn't possibly see a state performing there or in doing any good there in the next 20 or 20
No, far from doing any good. It would do harm to those it purports to represent, and of course to Israel, because the sole reason for Palestinism is the destruction of the Jewish state. It is not to create a state which never existed.
Yes.
So one has to look at the DNA of this cause.
And the other thing is that again, Irish people don't read. I'm not saying all Irish people, but people are not reading the situation here because.
Well, it's not just in Ireland; it's in Europe in general.
Yeah, there's clear evidence there that the Jewish people have had a consistent connection with the state of Israel now, where Israel is now. They've had a consistent connection there for 3,500 years.
Yes, of course. Yes.
You know, and it's and this myth again, and a lie that's going around is that the Israeli and Jewish people took over everything and didn't pay for anything.
Indeed,
took over. I mean, that lie has never been really
indeed,
you know, kind of put to bed. that they actually bought everything. They bought everything, every piece of land that they have, they bought it. And
yes.
I've never suspected Israel of colonial ambitions. Never.
No, of course not.
I believe that they want. I believe that the Jewish people want to live in peace.
Indeed, indeed. It's absurd to even think that upon the foundation of the Jewish state, reconstitution, should I say, of the Jewish state after 2,000 years and with 600,000, the population of 600,000, many of whom were survivors of the Holocaust, the first thing on their mind was to start a war. It is absurd. I see another question here. Now, yes, wasn't the empathy for the Palestinian cause an automatic association, given that they feel Northern Ireland is theirs and not Great Britain? That's another question that we're seeing, and I think Sinn Féin are playing this aspect very much, when indeed it is the opposite. Eugene, what would you like to say about that?
Yeah, look, there's, as I say, when people make that comparison, it's comparing apples and oranges.
Indeed,
it's not comparing like with like whatsoever. And we must remember that in Northern Ireland, we have the Good Friday Agreement, where all sides have agreed to allow the people to develop their own identity going forward, who they want to be belong to, and allow them to do that. And we've the Good Friday Agreement cements that agreement between unionists and nationalists. So
right.
At least there was an agreement there.
Yes,
and
indeed.
The other thing I'd say about the North and the way it's always compared with what's going on in Palestine, as bad as the IRA were, and as they did some very brutal things to people. Nothing could compare to what happened on October 7th.
No, of course not.
It could not. Of course not. And so it doesn't. You cannot. You cannot even compare it whatsoever to what happened.
That is very true, Eugene. The problem is that Sinn Féin, which is the political wing of the IRA, associates with that. That's the problem. That's the problem. So to a certain extent, they do render themselves accomplices, as indeed do many European governments. And that is the crux of the matter in Europe, and not just in Ireland, of course. Unfortunately, as you well know, the Palestinism has been supported with European taxpayers' money.
Yes.
And that applies to Ireland, and it applies to the rest of Europe as well. That is part of the tragedy.
And not only do we fund what's going on in when other countries stopped funding UNRWA, following evidence that its bases were being used, its people were involved in, we decided to give them an extra 10 million in funding.
Right.
And again, it's not seen in Ireland, because again, I've read a lot about this. UNRWA, in my opinion, is a central part of the problem in Gaza and in the PA, in the occupied territories.
Indeed. Liberated territories, Eugene. Let me correct you.
Okay. Liberate territories. Yeah.
Unless you mean they're occupied by Palestinism. In that case, you're right.
Yeah, occupied. No,
I'm just having a giggle. Sorry, Eugene. Now, I wanted to look at something else. In Ireland, I think that maybe facilitating the Palestinist narrative, the fact in effect there is a process of de-Christianization in Ireland, where religion is constantly under attack.
Yes.
Not that something better is being offered. In fact, something better will not be offered. That's patently obvious. Do you think that this is also a factor, this antagonism towards Christianity, which is sort of spreading into this, which is becoming a vector for this pro-Palestinism?
Okay, so back when all the priest scandal, the sexual crimes against children by priests took off in Ireland, the Catholic Church, for example, handed those who wanted to end Christianity in Ireland, they handed them
indeed
on a platter.
Yes,
for them to scrape away at the church and to get rid of it. So there is Ireland is nearly gone, as far as I can see. It's nearly gone post-Christian. It's not quite gone there, but it's on the way post-Christian. I suppose there's more and more people believe there's no need to believe in anything. You know, and I think that young people are going to suffer for that as time goes on. I'm not saying what religion or anything they should be, but what I'm saying is when you have nothing to believe in, it certainly is a downfall. But yes, forces again, the elite forces have used this situation to crush, to try and crush, and been successful in crushing Christianity in Ireland.
Indeed. And in fact, that is a great contributing factor to the illiteracy with regard to biblical knowledge and indeed history, which facilitates this distortion by this Palestinist ideology. So yes, and now we have another question here. The current Christian churches in Ireland have failed to stick their head above the parapet and re-evangelize and resell Christian morals and teaching. What is your opinion? That's very much in line with what we've been saying. Would you like to comment on that?
That person who asked that question is absolutely 100% right, because the church has failed to come out fighting, you know, and really, you know, to give moral leadership to its flock, and it seems to be that, like I said earlier, politicians in the Parliament aren't afraid to say what they think. I think it also extends to the church, that they're afraid that they will be you know, they won't be contemporary if they outline that some things are morally wrong, and I think that's a shame, and I think it's dangerous as well.
It's dangerous, and I believe Palestinism assists in this. I believe it is, and I've said it and I'll repeat it, that Palestinism is the retrovirus which is weakening Western Christian civilization. Eugene, thank you very much. We're going to close it there. Thank you for your insights. That was very interesting. I'm sure our viewers appreciate that. I've thoroughly enjoyed it. I've enjoyed reconnecting with you all the time, as you well know, and I look forward to hearing from you again in the future. Thank you very much, Eugene.
And thank you, Marco, and thank you to your listeners. And I really enjoyed the conversation we had between us. And I hope I gave some light about how Ireland is behaving in this matter.
Thank you so much, Eugene. I wish you a pleasant evening, and I look forward to speaking to you again.
Ciao.